Hello everybody, YouTube. So I guess this is our first video on YouTube. My name is Ash and this is
Nazanin.
we are both psychologists and we thought we would run a channel on YouTube to discuss anything related to psychology. To start with, I think it's a great idea to have the first video on one of the novels by the great Dostoevsky, who I'm a fan of, and you're a fan of too, right?
Yes, definitely. His stories, his novels, definitely a fan.
So we will start this video by talking about one of his masterpieces, The Crime and Punishment. For me, I have this copy of it, The Crime and Punishment. This is by Every Man's Library Publishers Collection.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the translation I would personally recommend. It's translated by Richard Pever, and I cannot pronounce this second author, Wolokonsky. Yeah. And then your copy is?
So I have got this one. This came as part of a collection. So I had you got the collection for me. So that was part of. This was one of the I think 6 or 5 novels. So it has the main novels, and Crime and Punishment is one of them. And I think this was one of the first that I read from the novel as well, or maybe second. It was the second one that I read because
you read Notes from the Underground.
Yes, yeah. But I read it from you, so it wasn't part of the collection.
Right.
So it was your copy.
Oh,
but anyway,
yeah.
So from my copies, it was the first that I read. But my the translation is by Constance Garnett.
Oh, he's also a well-known translator of Dostoevsky and Russian literature. But from what I have heard, Pever, these guys who translated this copy, they are well known for the modern and easy translation.
So have you read my? Because looking at my copy, I think this was great. Like I didn't see anything wrong with it, and I was able to sort of like follow it. I didn't feel like there was anything that I didn't understand. You've read this copy?
I've read that translation, that copy. Yeah.
Yes, this translation, and you've also read that.
I haven't read that, but I've looked through it, and I think it's a great translation in terms of being modern and I guess some people would say closer to the actual Russian language. Maybe I can't comment too much on it. I haven't read it, but I just know that it's a good translation.
Okay.
So this is, if I'm going back to reread Dostoevsky's novels, I will be going back to this translation.
You would be going back to that. Okay. All right. Well, I don't know that yet, but I trust that you know your stuff better than I do. You've actually read most of Dostoevsky's work so far.
Oh yeah, I've read all of his major novels. I've read a lot of his short stories. Yeah, but I think I believe all of Dostoevsky's works are masterpieces. But this was the first Dostoevsky I read. Crime and Punishment was my first. I dived deeply into the first one, and I had an interesting experience, which we will get to.
Okay. All right. Okay. So I'm going to sort of like ask you. So this is like the first sip of the video. The first sip would include an introduction about the book that we're reading. So obviously today is Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky, right? So if you were to sort of tell somebody, if you were to tell a friend about what the book is about, what would you say? And first of all, before you start, are you going to have any spoilers?
No spoilers.
Okay, no spoilers. So if you haven't read the book, you can still listen to this, okay?
If I were to recommend a book, I would, or introduce it to someone who hasn't read it, I would say this is a book suitable for anybody who is interested to know what goes on in a criminal's mind. And I think Dostoevsky, he believed that we are so quick to judge criminals and condemn them and just label them as evil. And he said that the hard thing to do is actually to understand them. And obviously he spent time in Siberia and in prison. And he got to know some of those prisoners, and he spoke to them, he studied them, and he realized that, hold on, many of them, they have good reason for their crimes for themselves. They justify it internally, and they rationalize it, and from the outside we don't see any of that. So he gives us a glimpse into a criminal's, or somebody, he wasn't the character in the novel is not a criminal, but he committed a crime. He wants us to know what goes on behind the scenes in his mind.
Yeah.
So I think obviously that's a very limited description of the novel, but
Without obviously spoiling it. Of
without
course.
spoiling it, yeah. But there's so much into this novel, I think, and the more I think that it's one of those things that the more you read it, the more you learn.
Yeah. I think if I was to sort of like, if I was to talk about the book to somebody and sort of, if I was to convince them in terms of why they should read this book and, you know, why they should give it a chance, I would probably sort of say this is about a killer. Well, his name is Raskolnikov. So Raskolnikov decides to kill a woman, basically murder a woman, because he thinks it's for
Are we not spoiling it right now?
No, we're not, because that you can sort of probably read that at the back of the books anyway.
Yeah, I guess.
Okay. So basically he kills the woman, and then we sort of go into his mind and what he feels and how he thinks, and the things that follow, the events that follow the actual event of murdering the lady.
No, I think it's around 80 pages before the actual incident, the main incident of the novel happens, around page 80 something.
I mean, it depends on the size of the book,
yeah.
But so I think that's when the story starts, right? So after here might be sort of, we probably will have spoilers from here on. Yeah. But okay, so this is overall, this is what happens. This is what the book is about. So your reflections, what did you think about the book? What are your thoughts?
My experience coming to Crime and Punishment was, I knew that it's a psychology book, but for me, I never had an experience of reading novels for psychology. I was always used to, you know, the psychology section in the bookstores that we have today, that you know, the top 10 psychological tricks.
Yeah.
Body language and top 10 this, top 10 that. So I came to Crime and Punishment thinking it's going to teach me something about psychology. So I remember reading it, and halfway through I was thinking, so where is the psychology? And then by the time I finished it, I was still questioning, so what did I learn in terms of psychology? And then it just clicked. All of a sudden I realized the whole book was psychology in a context. It's a strange thing for us, because I realized that in what we have today in non-fiction books, where it's like a ready-made meal that we give to readers. Yeah, microwavable, we have reduced it to simple, you know, short sentences and
simple terms. Yeah.
Russian literature, especially at the time of Dostoevsky, it wasn't like that. They want to teach you things, but they do it in the form of a story, so it has a context. And I think that's actually a better way, because you will remember that story and it will always be with you. So yeah, it clicked for me what the novel was about and what I learned from it in terms of psychology, and it was very powerful, and to this day, and I think will always stay with me.
So
what was your first impression?
I'll come back to me, but before we do, I just want to ask you a question. So you said it was different in terms of psychology. What did it teach you in terms of psychology?
Because our background is in Western psychology. It taught me that, for me, I think for us human beings, real psychology is in a context. It happens in real life, not in labs. So I learned that from the book, that to understand psychology, we need to have a context. Main thing, yeah. That was
okay, that's interesting that you say, like, you need, it made you realize that to understand psychology of people, you need to have context. And I think it goes back to the book, doesn't it? Because so I started, for example, saying he is a killer, right? And that's what we see. We see like murderers, we see good, evil, and we have sort of this distinction between what is good and what is bad. It's so fascinating, because even if you think back to like Disney movies from 50s and 60s and 40s, whenever, you always have the good characters and you have the bad characters. Now, good characters in Disney movies, in Disney, for example, animated movies, they have everything good with it. They have all the good traits. But the villains, they never have any good traits in them. They're so one-dimensional. What we see in the book is we follow Raskolnikov, who is a killer. Now, if you didn't read about Raskolnikov, if you weren't in his mind, you would probably judge him and think, oh, he is such an evil man. Because what happens in the book, now obviously we can share it now because we're past spoilers, but he goes in to kill the woman and he kills the sister as well. He ends up killing the sister because the sister who is sort of very innocent, and she also gets abused by the main woman, by the pawnbroker. But she walks in, so Raskolnikov then has to kill the sister as well to save himself. So he ends up killing both people.
So the main character of the story,
Yeah.
Crime and Punishment, is this guy called Raskolnikov. And he is this young man, he's a student. He's a very smart person, contrary to what we think criminals, that we think they're all dumb. But he's actually a law student, is it?
Ex-law student, but he can't study anymore because he doesn't have money.
Yeah, so he's a student in a financially difficult position. And he also has a mother and a sister who are also poor. So Raskolnikov is the main character's story. And then what happens is Raskolnikov, he obviously is financially struggling, and he comes across this lady who is a pawnbroker, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So today we call them loan sharks.
Maybe.
Yeah,
Maybe. Pawnbroker.
Yeah, so this old, is she old? This pawnbroker?
Yeah, so she's quite old, and she is taking a lot from people, and she's holding on to these, and so he sees this woman as somebody who's quite evil and not likable.
Yeah, so Raskolnikov comes across this old woman who is not a nice person, and she also has a sister who has a learning disability or something. She's not well, I think, the sister.
Well, we don't know if she's got a learning disability or not. We just know that she abuses the sister. She's quite the young sister is quite timid and is overpowered by this old woman.
So Raskolnikov, he thinks to himself, I think he's thinking that life isn't fair. I'm a student, I can do so much good to society, and I'm poor. And then there's this woman who is taking money of people. She's not good for society, and she's also abusing her sister. And then he has this thought, and this is where the story starts to get interesting. He has this thought that what if I killed this pawnbroker, this old lady, took her money, and I did good with it.
Yeah.
So what if I do one wrong or one evil deed, and then I could do hundreds of good deeds after it. So in his mind, it makes sense. Yeah, she's no good for us. She's no good for the society, but I can do good. So I get rid of her. I kill her. I take her money.
Right. But what happens then? Because now that takes me to the most interesting, most fascinating part of the story that is not really told to us in sort of like a simple way, but it's conveyed to us by Dostoevsky. And that takes us to morality, right? Because we learn about Raskolnikov having a chat with the detective who's now investigating the deaths of the women. Now, obviously, there's a chase, not chase, but there's a whole thrilling part of the book where he's hiding. He thinks they're after him, and that. But anyway, so I think he's sitting in a cafe or somewhere, and he's having a chat with the detective who is investigating the case. And the detective then mentions about Raskolnikov writing several short, I think not stories, but sort of like edits.
But before we go to that, the story when Raskolnikov commits that crime, because after he rationalizes it, he commits the crime, and then the interesting thing is that what he thought in his mind was completely different to what actually happened, because he thought, I'm going to kill this woman, take the money, but once he does the crime, in reality, it doesn't go the way he thought it would, and obviously, he gets so paranoid after he does the crime.
How does it not go the way it's supposed to go?
first of all, I think this is how Dostoevsky it teaches us about psychology, that a lot of the times what you think in your head doesn't always happen in reality, and I think he conveys that in a lot of his stories. That reality is not always the same. Things happen. Like when Raskolnikov goes to kill this woman, all of a sudden the sister comes too. The sister comes in, and he wasn't expecting to see the sister, so he actually ends up killing the sister too. And then now he's got two burdens of guilt on his back. And then he gets to the point when he does the crime, he realizes that he doesn't feel what he thought he would feel. He feels guilty and paranoid.
Yeah,
and to the point where he doesn't even care about the money anymore, and he starts struggling with the burden of guilt. And this is interesting because we have two different Raskolnikovs. We have Raskolnikov before the crime, and then the Raskolnikov after the crime is a completely different person.
Yeah.
And this is where he gets very paranoid, and he's constantly thinking about it, and obviously the police are investigating the crime, and he's constantly thinking that they're after him. So he has no peace.
No.
He loses his peace, yeah. And I think, in a way, Dostoevsky was trying to tell us that is the real punishment. What goes on in the criminal's head is the real punishment. The loss of peace and the guilt, that is the punishment, and the punishment comes with the crime.
So do you think people who go sort of like who are put away, because some people, for example, they go to camps, they go to prison, do you think that is a punishment, or is Dostoevsky saying a punishment is inside someone's head?
I don't know all the time, but I think Dostoevsky says that a lot of the time, since we are human beings and we are emotional and we have a conscience, the punishment that our conscious side imposes on us is much worse than the punishment of prisons.
Yeah.
In this case, in the case of Raskolnikov, he ended up going to prison to feel better.
Because
his conscience was more severe than in prison.
So that takes me to a couple of questions about philosophical questions.
So getting back to where you was,
yes,
the police.
Yes.
Right. So the police is investigating Raskolnikov.
Yeah.
And then you want to talk about morality there.
Yeah. So yes. So that was one of my philosophical sort of questions, or something like an intriguing thought that came to mind. So the Raskolnikov. So we learn about Raskolnikov and how he's writing these short pieces for, I think, a journal. Now, again, I read that a while ago, so I can't remember which journal or how it sort of went ahead. But basically, he's writing these pieces, and this detective sees them and sort of hears about them. And he says, right, so tell me about these pieces. So one of the pieces that Raskolnikov has written is about...
The article.
Yeah.
He's written an article.
Yeah, yes. It's about extraordinary men. Right, he's got quite a bit of a fascination with Napoleon, because he sees Napoleon as an extraordinary man. Now, in what Raskolnikov is saying, and do you know what? I cannot stop thinking about this since reading this part. I keep seeing this around me, and I don't know if I agree with him. I think I do somehow. But he talks about extraordinary men who are sort of these. I mean, obviously, bear in mind that this book was written, 150, 200 years ago. So he does talk about men, but it can be women as well. So I think in this sense, we're just talking about human beings. But these extraordinary human beings, that they're just above everybody else. He talks about how some people are just never going to be extraordinary. But every now and then, you're going to have somebody extraordinary who's going to be above everybody. So he's going to be above everybody else, and this person is able to cross morality boundaries, is able to do things that are unthinkable to us as normal beings, normal people, because they just can, because they can step over, they can cross boundaries, and for the good of society, right? So he talks about Napoleon, how he's killed so many people, and I think in many ways, Raskolnikov thinks that he can be, and he is, an extraordinary man. And that's what the police is asking him as well. So he thinks because he's extraordinary, he can go and kill the woman for the good of the society.
Yeah. So this is what I was talking about when I said Dostoevsky wants to show us that there is a whole thinking process going on behind the criminal's mind and their actions. So for Raskolnikov, he had in his mind, he saw the world and the people in the world into two categories. He saw that for him, people are either extraordinary or ordinary.
Yeah.
Now, extraordinary people are rare, and I think this also reminds me of what Nietzsche said. He said, you know, the Übermensch, the Overman, the Superman, you know, the rare people, the higher men, actually, and
Right.
the herd, right? For Raskolnikov, it was the same, that, you know, we have all these ordinary people who are coward, that they're not brave enough to be Napoleons. And then we have extraordinary individuals in history who have been courageous, and they moved history forward. And he thought he was one of them. He thought that I am an extraordinary person. I'm a Napoleon sort of character. I can go and commit this crime, do this, and then move on with my life. And then what he realized in reality was that he was not.
He was not, right?
He was not.
Because that was my question. Was he extraordinary?
No.
And do you know, it reminds me actually that the concept on its own, it reminds me of a movie that we watched together from Netflix, White Tiger, where this man thinks that he every now and then, very rarely you get white tigers, and they're so rare, and he wanted to be the white tiger, and he lives in poverty, and he ends up going sort of above everybody else, but with whatever he can do, because he has to put his morality to one side, his ethics to one side, and he doesn't have ethics. He doesn't care about more. He cares about himself. I know Raskolnikov wanted to do what was good for the society, but in many ways he also had his own agenda, his own selfishness, because I think he exchanged something with the woman as well. So the woman had something of his. So although he did say he wanted to do that for the good of society, he had his own agenda. He had his own hatred towards the woman. So was he using that as a way of justifying what he wanted to do? So killing, I guess, is not, or committing a crime is not as simple as we think it is. And now my second part of philosophical question that I had was, so you talked about him going to prison. Yeah, because he basically confessed, because he was so fed up with this guilt that he was experiencing. So that takes me to the concept of free will. Right? Where was he free? Did he have free will, do you think?
Yeah.
You think he did?
I don't see how free will comes into this.
So did he have, so when I talk about free will, is that, free will would be, so he's killed this woman, but then he becomes prisoner sort of in his own mind. So as if he's not free, he's trapped in his own mind. Okay, so by going to prison, did he become free?
I think, yeah. I think by going to prison, he redeemed himself.
Right.
From his psychological punishment.
Right.
Yeah.
So freedom, right? Is it inner or outer?
It depends if you're ordinary or extraordinary.
Do you think?
Yeah, I think if you're extraordinary, you're just a different sort of human being. I don't know, people in history who've committed, great crimes, they were not Raskolnikov, were they?
How do you know?
We don't know. True.
How do you know they were not? We don't know. We
Did
only know about...
Napoleon struggle with guilt?
I don't know. Well, maybe if we had a book on Napoleon, maybe we would know.
I think what the book is trying to say, that if he was an extraordinary person, some people can overcome their guilt.
Yeah.
But if you're not, like Raskolnikov, he couldn't overcome his guilt. And he saw his guilt everywhere. And it's interesting that he tried to do good deeds at some point in his life. And he going from that person that he thought he was to the person that when he met Sonia, right?
Yes, yeah.
And he tried to help that family when Sonia's father died.
Yeah.
I guess he was trying to tell himself that he's a good person, because he really thought, am I a bad person? And that it was that guilt.
That's right.
And,
okay, so that's a good point. So in his mind, he wants to be a good person. So, there was something on Game of Thrones, an old woman. So she is sort of like the queen of the High Gardens. It's a whole lot of story. But for anyone who's watched Game of Thrones, they would know. And this old lady, she is, anyway, so I can't remember her name. But at some point, she talks about killing innocent people, right? And she's telling Jamie Lannister, he was one of the characters in the book and in the series. He tells him as she's about to die that she's actually killed his son. She confesses, but do you know what else she says? It just fascinated me. She says, I've killed so many people, and I thought I would lose sleep over them, but I was surprised to see myself sleep well. She didn't feel guilty.
I think that's what extraordinary individuals, they don't care.
She didn't. She wanted to care about people, about innocent people. She didn't. She said she actually didn't even lose sleep over them. She just didn't care, and she just confesses to killing his son, and she dies peacefully. So that was very interesting. Right. I'm just going to go to last drop. Okay. Any concluding remarks about so what did you think of the story overall?
I believe this is a book on rationality and reason versus emotions. You see, for Dostoevsky, he saw that the modern age was coming, and the modern age was all about rationality and reason,
right,
and science, and we're gonna have a science and rationality. This idea that we're gonna find all the answers to human happiness. He didn't agree with that. He thought human beings are irrational and they're emotional and they're flawed. So here we see that Raskolnikov, he has this reasonable, rational image in his mind.
Right, because it makes sense.
It makes sense.
It makes sense to him.
Just because it makes sense in your mind doesn't mean it's going to work for you, because you're a flawed human being.
Yeah.
Emotional. This is the takeaway from the story for me. Yeah.
Yeah.
What about you?
I think yes, same. I think I think that there's a lot to it. It's just so deep. I think
Deep, yeah.
we can talk about it all day. But if I was to sort of summarize, I'd say I'd say from a different perspective, if I was to sort of explain it to somebody, and stepping back from the philosophical side, which you just elaborated on, I absolutely agree and I loved. If I wanted to step out, I'd say it's a thriller book, but do not expect the modern thriller from it. If you're truly interested, for example, you see people like people say, I'm a horror movie fan, right? But, they'll watch all these horror movies with like sound effects. And if you mute the sound effects, you don't get scared anymore because you just don't care. And, it's all sound effects that's just making you jump. And that's not really horror movie to me.
Right.
And you see other people saying, oh, I love this. And this movie was so scary, but there is no jumping scene in it.
So that's what I would call a psychological horror.
Right.
Which is they don't try to scare you, but the story itself will haunt you.
Yes, exactly
so
that.
It's a psychological thriller.
It's a psychological thriller. Yeah. Do not expect to jump. I've heard people saying, oh, I get bored, it's too long. It's not too long if you know what you're looking for. So if you're expecting to sort of jump and sort of be on the edge of your seat constantly throughout the book, that's not going to happen. There are instances where you have that. But if you're expecting something to stay with you for the rest of your life, like I read this last year and I still remember probably most of the book. Black pages, I mean, when I say most of the book.
Yeah.
So if you're expecting something, if you want something like something that stays with you, and this is probably why it's still going on 200 years later, 150 years later, is obviously this is the book to go with.
Another thing I wanted to point out is I noticed that sometimes Dostoevsky, from his point of view, women have a place in saving men.
Right.
And I think in this book he shows that with Sonia, the character of Sonia, who meets Raskolnikov, and she actually helps him to face his crime and salvation. And also I would also suggest if anybody's reading any novels by Dostoevsky, you might notice that Dostoevsky uses a lot of names and sometimes uses different names for the same person.
Oh, yes.
It would be a good idea to have a piece of paper, a separate piece of paper, and when you come across these names, to write them down and remind yourself who's who. And then every time you come across this name again, you're not sure, you can look at the paper. So it stops you being confused.
That is such a good suggestion, because I remember you suggested this to me. You said, first when I started reading Dostoevsky novels, you said, put, the same thing you suggested, same advice. And I said, you know what, it's fine, thank you. But I remember And I remember sort of like not taking notes, thinking I will remember. And I really struggled. It got to the halfway through and I couldn't go back to sort of memorize the names or remember the names. So I had to think really carefully about who was who. And you're right, because sometimes one character can have 2 or 3 names.
Yeah.
And I would take this advice, and I've started doing that now. On the back of my books, I've got like the names. I've got like the little arrows showing who's who and
for
who's
me, the worst
connected.
one was the novel Demons, and so many names. But I did all right because, like I said, I started writing names on a different piece of paper.
Yeah. Well, keep that for the review, for the Demons review.
Yes.
So we've talked about obviously the concluding remarks, and I also wanted to sort of go through some questions. I wanted to ask you some questions, okay, about the book itself. So I've got them written down because I didn't want to forget them. And I wanted to ask your views, all right? So my first question is, this one's already done. Okay, your favorite character from the book?
It's I would say Raskolnikov, because I think a lot of us relate to Raskolnikov. You know, the way we think.
Do you relate?
I can relate. If I was in his place, I can see myself relating to him. And I think this novel. That's why it's also a warning to us from Dostoevsky that, you know, be careful.
What you wish for.
Be careful what you wish for, and just because you think something and it makes sense, it doesn't always work out that way.
Okay. I think mine was Sonia.
And why is that?
Sonia, so obviously I'm guessing everybody will know by now, but Sonia was the girl who sort of falls in love with Raskolnikov, and sort of they end up together at the end.
She also had a difficult life.
She had a difficult life, and she is. I was just fascinated. I just love this girl. She's an 18-year-old girl. She is now. I made a note because it says in the book that she had a special stamp. She just looks so. Her dress is torn. She just looks so disheveled. But she's a prostitute.
Yeah.
And she has this special stamp. But interestingly enough, she is a symbol of purity in the book. To me, she is the symbol of purity, innocence. She is just doing what she has to do because her family is so poor. And Katerina, who is her, I think, stepmother, I believe, is dying because she's so sick. Her dad is a drunk who's also dying. Well, he dies in the book. She's got 3 siblings to look after, and they're so young, they're so dependent. She's just forced to do, and she's just this lovely, beautiful girl. And throughout the book, you sort of see and feel her beauty, both inside and outside. You just see her. She's just a symbol of beauty. And innocence. And it just, throughout the book, I really wished for her to get with Raskolnikov, because I sort of felt like she would be the only person who could heal him. And she did. So it was just so wonderful. And you don't really see that till the last page. And it was just so lovely. So Sonia is my favorite. Now, we talked about the favorite, okay? I think I lost one. Was there a character that you were fascinated by? Not necessarily your favorite.
Compared to Dostoevsky's other novels, I don't think there's too many characters in Crime and Punishment. So your question was if I was fascinated by
fascinated, or was there a scene from a character that sort of stood with you?
Not really, but the policeman who was investigating Raskolnikov, he's very smart.
Yes.
And it's like he started doubting Raskolnikov without telling him, and he started to play these mind games with him. And then that's where Raskolnikov was questioning himself, and he suffered even more when he started questioning, does he know that I've committed the crime or not? Right. And at some point he even tells him, like, come on, just tell me. Are you accusing me?
Because he's so overwhelmed.
I like characters who are smart. And I think this policeman was a very smart character.
Right.
He didn't just let Raskolnikov go. He followed him.
I do wonder, that's a really good point, because I do wonder if his line of questioning and sort of added to Raskolnikov's paranoia, which led to Raskolnikov's confession. So although he didn't really get it out of Raskolnikov, maybe indirectly he influenced.
You see, it's interesting because when you read the book, you realize that Raskolnikov, you feel what Raskolnikov is feeling, and you feel like any moment they're gonna come for you, and you
Uh-huh.
don't have peace. You don't feel free. Your freedom's taken because you feel like, do they know? Are they gonna find the evidence? Are they gonna come for me? And it's so horrible to live that way. And you think to yourself, you know what? I'm gonna go to prison and just for, you know, for years.
Yeah.
At least when I come out, I don't have that, paranoia.
Yeah, that freedom,
That freedom.
right? I free myself by going and putting myself in a
Yeah.
confined environment. It's so paradoxical.
And I think people who are on the run for any crime, they would feel that. They know what it feels like. You're constantly on the run.
Yeah.
And you have no peace.
But he's on the run in his mind.
In his mind.
Right?
Yeah.
So was there a scene that stuck out for you in the book or scenes?
Obviously the scene of the crime where the Raskolnikov committed the crime. That
Right.
is the one that stands out for me.
Okay. For
You
me?
got any more questions?
Yeah, I do have a couple of more questions. So for me, the scene that stuck out was one of the scenes. Obviously the crime, I think that's the main one anyway. But the part where Katerina, so that's Sonia's mother. I think a couple of scenes around Katerina it really affected me, had such an impact on me, and I couldn't stop thinking about her for days. One is where she's in bed dying, and throughout the book, she's so religious and she believes in God. But when she's in a deathbed, because all this time she thinks God is going to protect her, and then she starts cursing, she starts having a go at God because she's so mad at God. She's so angry. And I think that conflict in her is so real. And I felt it. I felt that conflict where she's relied on God to save her. And now she's thinking, I'm going and my kids are going to be orphaned. They're probably going to starve to death, And, what happened? You're supposed to protect me. And she's really questioning her whole religion. She's questioning her philosophy of life in her deathbed. And even just now talking, it just makes my hair stand on it. I think it's just such an emotional scene, so real. I just love that. For me, that was the scene that stuck with me. One of the scenes. Right. I have two more questions. Okay. So one is, there's a line that sums up the book. Okay. The book's spirit. And you see that a lot online. And just wanted to know your thoughts. Now, I don't know if you know the quote anyway, but the quote is, pain and suffering are always inevitable for a large intelligence and a deep heart.
Right.
So just wondered if you did have any thoughts on this.
Yeah.
Seems like you already know, you've already seen this quote so
I've
many
seen
times.
this quote. At first, I didn't know what to make of it. I think Raskolnikov he was intelligent and he had a deep heart. And I think that's why he suffered when he committed the crime.
Right.
He couldn't just throw it away.
Okay.
So I think that's what Dostoevsky is trying to say, that if you're intelligent and you have a deep heart, it's inevitable. If you're intelligent, you understand things. You see people, you suffer anyway. It's irrelevant of if you commit a crime like Raskolnikov or not, because you're intelligent and you have a deep heart. When you see people suffering, you will suffer. Because you're intelligent, you understand why they're suffering, and sometimes you cannot help them.
Mm.
I think that's what Dostoevsky himself felt too, because I think it's somewhere he said that I understand too much, and that's why I suffer. Because when you understand, you realize that when you don't understand, you categorize people into evil and good, and that's easy. You don't suffer. But when you start understanding, you realize it's not good and evil. People are flawed. They're weak. They go through so much unnecessary suffering sometimes.
Yeah.
And just saying it makes you suffer because you have a deep heart.
Would everybody say that because they're intelligent? They think they're intelligent, like just because Raskolnikov. Do you get where I'm coming from? Because Raskolnikov thought he was an extraordinary man, right? So do we all say, "Oh yes, I can totally get this quote because I'm also intelligent. I also feel the suffering of other people." So is this a quote to show us that we could be Raskolnikov? Because, I'm looking at this and I'm like, I agree because, I see myself as intelligent, but I'm sure everybody would say they'd agree with that. So can we all be Raskolnikov? Because we all think we're that different to other people. We're intelligent, we're extraordinary.
Yeah, and that's why I think it's a sort of a warning to the modern age people that
And modern age includes
including
us.
us. And I think the things that happened in Russia after Dostoevsky died, so many millions of people were killed because it made sense reasonably
Mm-hmm.
at the time, and I think he was warning about that. It's, reason is limited, and it doesn't always work out in reality.
Yes.
Yeah, and this is why I think I love Notes from the Underground. It's such an interesting psychological book.
Mm. But we'll go to that another time.
That.
So my last question, okay, is right. I want you to tell me what you thought about the book itself. Okay, so what did you think about, for example, the book cover, the content of the book? I mean, you talked about the content already. Is there any other comments that you have about the book itself, the physical copy itself? Like, was it too long, do you think? Could it have been cut down?
No, I don't. Again, you come to Dostoevsky, you realize that you might think his novels are long, but that's just the way it is, and I accept it.
So do you think they're long?
No, I don't think Crime and Punishment is long. I think some of the other books might be. You might think they're long, but yeah, I suspend my judgment on that.
Okay, so what did you think about the title, Crime and Punishment? Do you think it's suited?
Yes, it's a perfect title because to me it means the punishment usually, or sometimes, comes with the crime.
Right.
Whether we punish the criminal or not, his conscience will take the punishment on him.
And going back to Crime and Punishment, what was the crime and what was the punishment?
The crime was murder. The punishment was guilt and paranoia, and loss of freedom mentally.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Good point. Thank you. Do you have any questions for me?
Do you told us you had a favorite character, which was Sonia.
Uh-huh.
So, do you have any last remarks on the book itself? Anything you want to share?
No,
Is there anything you would change?
Anything I would change from the book? Definitely not. I think I'm really glad that I think whether I like it or not, I will relate with women more in a book or whatever I'm watching. Just because I'm a woman, I probably relate to them more. And I'm glad that Raskolnikov's sister, I can't remember her name now, Dunya, that's it. I'm glad Dunya, I'm glad his mum, I'm glad people like Sonia and Katerina, they all had really, really sort of like, you had good character development. I mean, for all of them he did anyway, but for these women especially, and they played such strong parts in the book, and just sort of mirrored, to me, they mirrored Raskolnikov. So when he was angry, he saw the calmness. When he was questioning his own morality, the women in his life showed morality, showed what ethics, what he wanted to see, showed him kindness. And I think that parallel or the mirroring of his image, it really helped him make a decision and to feel more at ease. So to me, reading a book that has got like female characters and building on them, it really helps. And that had that. So yeah, that was my concluding remarks. All right.
All right. Thank you for watching, and we look forward to the next episode of book reviews.
Do we know what the next book is going to be?
Not yet, but I guess we'll find out.
We'll find out. We don't know either, right?
Yeah.
Okay.